Would you ask Mr. Daly to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Daly, ready to carry on?
Yes, absolutely.
Good, thank you. Yes, Mr. Bennett.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Daly, before the break for lunch, you were telling us about the understanding of the purpose of the inputs from DCLG, as you put it. And you said that the learning was brought back for the FELOs to say that you might not usually get an external wall as part of your consultation process, but if you do, these are the routes to compliance and these are the risks if you don't take them seriously. I just want to understand, if we can please, a little bit more about the consultations you're referring to, or that process. Mm-hmm. That's a process of statutory consultation, is this right, between the, or rather with the LFB by building control officers?
Yes, absolutely. We referred to it earlier today.
Yes, we did.
Normally concerns itself with means of escape and facilities for firefighters.
Yes.
As I mentioned earlier, on occasions we are sometimes given a more complete bundle from the building control body, and where there are aspects that we might want to comment on, we do. But it's not usual. And just sorry if I may, in terms of the presentation, the context of the day when it was presented by DCLG was very much that, you know, the diagrams that you showed were produced as part of that package from DCLG. They aren't LFB products as such, they were pulled together from that presentation. I think they illustrate why we have the regulations in place that we do and the importance of them. So it's not so much, it doesn't represent learning, if you like, it's about what underpins the regulations and the need for them. And so that was what was being brought back.
Right. The consultation process that you're describing, mm-hmm. You say that it's firefighting, means of escape and firefighting installations, effectively. Those clearly fall within the scope of the RRO. Is the normal delimitation ambit of those consultations the scope of the RRO itself?
Generally, they're the bits to which we'd be a statutory consultee.
Yes, I see. But so do we take it that this training, so far as those consultations was concerned, took fellows, FELOs, a little bit further than the normal scope of the consultation?
Yes, I think so. I think it's areas of professional concern and interest that would be shared amongst the professional group. Right.
Did anybody at that time think, anybody in your department think, that what was coming back from that 7th of July 2016 NHBC conference was of wider interest to the Brigade generally, rather than to the interests only of FELOs and their consultation role?
No, I think it's, if anything, it was taken as a reassurance, if you like, about what we were seeing internationally and a reassurance of the conditions and the regulations in this country. I think the examples that were shown in that presentation of the two buildings in this country are very different from some of the international examples provided, in so much as the Basingstoke example is a steel framed building where the glazing failed, and Greenock has more in common with both Lacanau and Shepherd's Court in terms of the materials and the type of structure that was involved.
Reassurance in what way?
In so much as the regulations are there for a reason. I think that was part of the presentation.
Right.
Is they are there to underpin safe buildings in this country.
Right. Right. Now, of course, I'm just thinking through the chronology. This is July 2016. You'd been head of fire safety some months. You'd also, I think we've established this morning, seen some of the communications between the LFB and DCLG that had happened in 2011, 12 and 13, mm-hmm. between, for example, Commissioner Dobson and Brandon Lewis MP, about the lack of clarity or perhaps ambiguity in respect of certain aspects of approved document B. Did the fact of that correspondence trigger any views in your own mind about whether the DCLG had satisfied itself or satisfied you about those problems, and was presenting approved document B as entirely clear and straightforward?
My understanding is that at the conference there was discussion. So I wasn't there, but this is part of the feedback. What was that there was discussion around how people interpret the guidance and whether or not it was clear for everyone who is intended to use that guidance.
Right.
I think that's been part of our concern. I think it was a concern shared at that conference. I think it's a concern that's been shared more widely than that. So in terms of was I satisfied? I think the fact that when Shepherd's Court happened very shortly after that, the actions that we took suggest that I wasn't. I still asked that question.
Yes, and we'll come to that now, pretty much. But you will remember I read to you paragraph 7 of Dave Green's witness statement, where he said that the purpose of the presentation was to cascade elements of the learning he'd received at the NHBC seminar to FELOs. Was there a general practice within the fire engineering department of feeding learning from seminars such as the NHBC seminar back to LFB personnel?
There has been occasions. One that I can think of would be around ventilation systems. So ventilation systems in buildings range from very simple manual interventions to automatic systems and quite complex systems in more highly engineered buildings. And it's entirely possible that operational crews would come into contact with those and would need some guidance as to what they should operate and not operate, because obviously it's, in some of those instances it's finding the right person with the right experience to know how to operate those buildings. Right.
And was any thought given at the time, specifically mid-July 2016, to cascading, as it said, the elements of this learning that Dave Green had obtained at the NHB seminar to personnel other than FELOs, for example, operational firefighters?
No, I think it was shared with senior fire safety officers as well. I think part of the intention was that here's the assurance we've had, here's the examples internationally, and let's be vigilant around what may be something that because we had some concerns and confidence issues around building control oversight in other areas around compartmentation, the paper I referred to earlier. I think it was part of that exercise as to see to what extent that reassurance was borne out or to what extent it may be called into question, which may then lead to some of those questions from Lindsay Seal around the Canning Town development you mentioned earlier.
Yes, I mean, when you say let's be vigilant around what may be something, etc., why wasn't any thought given to getting the operational crews informed, even if not trained, on what to be vigilant for, given what these slides in this learning tell you?
So I think some of the content is very technical in nature. I think we were moving forward with the pilots around operational crews undertaking some degree of regulatory checks, and part of that would be to share that information. I don't think it's something that you can routinely assume crews would grasp or understand, because it can be quite a complex area.
Right. Now, we know that there was a later version of this presentation which post-dated the Shepherd's Court fire.
Yes.
And that document was dated October 2016. Can we go, please, to LFB 3203916? LFB 3203916. Now, this is a document called Tall Buildings Facades, and it still bears the date 13th of July 2016. But as I understand it, it was rolled out, and we'll come to this in a bit more detail later, but this was rolled out to a group of people in October 2016. If we just scroll through it, go to page 2, page 3, page 4, 2, 3, 4, and then if we go to page 25, you can see there's diagram 40, and if one scrolls down through the rest of the document, you'll see that there are the various options taken from the technical guidance note. But if you go, please, to page 21, you'll see the general conclusion. I'll just read it to you. General conclusion: as a general principle, the external envelope of the building, bold, should not contribute to the fire spread along the facade. New construction material and method of construction are being used in facades, and with a limited understanding of their fire behaviour / performance, there is a need, in bold, to understand, in bold, first bullet point, what products are being used in the facade system and their fire behaviour, and, second bullet, if they are used appropriately and meet the relevant guidance. These could affect the way fires develop and spread in a building. Now, as you probably know, the first responding operational crews who attended the Grenfell Tower fire were taken to this presentation at phase 1 of this inquiry, and none of them could recall ever having seen it. Is that consistent with your understanding of who is likely to have seen this presentation or one like it?
Yes.
Are you aware that it was ever delivered to operational personnel?
I don't believe it was, no.
Now, could we go to LFB quadruple 04?
Sorry if I may. Not to operational personnel other than those in the role of potentially senior fire safety officer who do carry an operational element, just to be clear. Thank you.
Right, and that actually short circuits the next question, I think. But can you explain why it was never rolled out, even in an information form, to frontline firefighters, let alone put into a training package?
I think to look at the context within which it's a risk that was relevant or present. Part of the work that fire safety does generally is to look for trends and issues that are emerging in the built environment that we would share with colleagues. I think there was learning shared post-Lackanau. There was an awareness of unusual fire spread. We reported on unusual fire spread and structural failings as part of a routine reporting mechanism. I don't feel that at the moment, from what was presented here, that this was presenting or suggesting a trend or theme that was emerging. It was more, as I say, a document that reassured that the regulations were there to do their job. Clearly, we know now from not just the tragedy of Grenfell, but equally from the work we've done since to look at the built environment and high-rise residential premises, that there is an issue that is there and has been undetected for some time.
If you look at the second part of this slide, there is a need to understand the two things that I've read out to you.
Yes.
With this conclusion, these could affect the way fires develop and spread in a building. Why wasn't that need to understand a need to understand on the part of incident commanders attending an incident and firefighters in their teams?
I think in terms of what those 2 points are asking, that's about technical information about the specification of building facades that is not evident from looking at a facade, and the relevant guidance, again, is a technical element that would sit within fire safety to understand as part of that consultation process. The risk being, if those two issues are not properly understood, then the diagrams and the sentence there below could be the issue that would arise.
Was there a view taken, following on from what you just said, that there was no need for operational firefighters, particularly incident commanders, at watch manager level, to understand anything on this slide?
No, I don't think it's a case of no need. I think what we would need to do is understand the proportion of the size of the issue that would potentially face incident commanders. Incident commanders have a range of considerations when they turn up at an incident, and whilst we want to furnish them with as much information as possible to be able to do that job well, there is also the need to put some perspective around what that risk looks like and to what extent they could expect to encounter that risk in the environment.
Given the risk, which is that these could affect the way fires develop and spread in a building, why wasn't that risk, just in simple terms, put onto every single watch manager's radar within the brigade, so that when they did turn up at a fire where the cladding was involved in any way, they would know that this was something to do with the construction material and the method of construction, or at least could be, which would then inform their plan?
So I think that there was information available to incident commanders following Lackanau. I think the high-rise policy talked about fire spread. But I think what we witnessed at Grenfell is something very, very different to what our experience and exposure was at the time.
What is different, or what was different about, leaving aside scale,
Yeah.
which I understand, but what was different about the type of fire at Grenfell and the thing which this slide said needed to be understood?
So I think what we saw at Grenfell was extremely rapid fire spread that was beyond our experience, if you like, of what we had witnessed at other premises in the country. I think it was underpinned by, to a degree, faith in the regulatory system, that we weren't using those materials in this country. And I think this presentation outlines the reasons why they weren't used and the routes to compliance that manufacturers and those buildings should be satisfying themselves before using materials on a building.
Was a conscious decision taken not to percolate the information or the learning contained in this simple general conclusion slide down, I say down, maybe that is the right word, to operational firefighters?
I don't think there was a conscious decision, but equally I'm satisfied that if there was, because of the nature of the work we do, if there was something that was immediately relevant to the role of a firefighter that needed to be shared, then it would be, in the way I described earlier around some other aspects of emerging trends in the built environment. Things around fires in white goods, for example, being a good example of fire safety investigative work and work with manufacturers in the wider sector that was producing outcomes in the built environment that firefighters needed to be aware of and posing a risk to residents that we equally had a duty to communicate and educate them about.
Well, why weren't the lessons learnt in this slide, in particular in this conclusion, something that was immediately relevant to the role of a firefighter?
Because I don't think what this presentation is talking about is something that we had evidence of in this country. I think that's the point I'm making. I mean, you may take a different view, and I'm sure you will.
Forgive me, Mr. Daly, but there's nothing in the general conclusion that says that this general principle and the need to understand need only arise overseas and you needn't worry about it because it never happens here. There's nothing like that here, is there?
No, I think when you take that conclusion in the context of the wider presentation, I don't think you can simply look at one slide from a presentation that presents the whole context of the information.
Yes, but you're delivering it to London-based firefighters who are very much UK-based in the context of earlier fires, but critically the Shepherd's Court fire. So I ask again, why wasn't this relevant to roll out to operational firefighters?
I don't think I've got another answer to you than the one I've supplied.
Okay. Before we leave this topic, and we may come back to it, but can I ask you to look, please, at LFB 404014. And if you look down this is a sort of spreadsheet, really, but a list of names who were required attendees, and then over to page 2, some optional attendees at the presentation in October 2016. Just scanning your eye down the list of names, some of them are familiar. We know about Peter Wolfenden and Daniel Egan, who were actually on the fire ground on the 14th of June 2017. There are others who are familiar from the documents. Some are completely unfamiliar. In general, who is this group?
I recognise those as middle managers, some of whom I believe are senior fire safety officers, if not all.
Right, thank you. Now, I'm going to come... I may come back to this topic in due course. Can I turn, please, next to LFB 30244232? This is an email from Staff Officer Keely Foster of the 6th of September 2016, so a month or so before the last slideshow we were looking at. To Ron Dobson, the then Commissioner, in his last months of office, I think, 6th of September 2016, and she attaches a presentation called High Rise, Not High Risk. And you can see the second paragraph where she says, in addition to this, and not mentioned in this presentation currently, do you think it should also include growing concerns over the cladding of buildings? This article is quite interesting and details external spread through cladding and insulation products. And she attaches a link to an article. Let's look at that. It's at INQ 30148891. And it's an article contained on a website called high-rise-firefighting.co.uk. And if you look at the domain name at the very bottom of the page, you will see that that is indeed the website. Are you familiar with that website?
I'm not, no.
Right. Can we please look at the third paragraph on page 1? And you'll see that underneath the pictures, we've got Carlton Tower, Block 1, Leeds, Shirley Towers, Hampshire, and Altair in the UAE. And then if you look at the third paragraph below the pictures, it says this: also becoming more of an issue is external spread through cladding and insulation products. A common practice in the UK when refurbishing high-rise buildings is to clad the outside of the blocks with polystyrene insulation sheets, which are at least 4 inches thick. They're then covered with mesh and rendered. This gives them compliance with Class 1 surface spread of flame and a low fire propagation to BS 476 Part 6, 1989. Unfortunately, once this thin render coat fails or is disrupted, it exposes vast quantities of polystyrene. Installation of these insulation systems is a highly skilled process that required fire breaks through the wall surface. The guidance, UK ADB and BS 8414, generalises that the insulation material should be of, quotes, limited combustion, quotes, and that the cladding system will not permit excessive spread outside the building. Unfortunately, there are already instances in the UK where fire has travelled up the outside of a high-rise building via a clad insulation system. In one instance, Glasgow, 2009, it travelled 9 stories. Keely Foster is not, I think, am I right, a fire engineer?
No, she's not.
And she wasn't based in the fire safety department, is that right?
No, she was the Commissioner's staff officer, I believe, at the time.
Staff officer. And what did that role involve?
Supporting the Commissioner in his functions on a day-to-day basis.
Right, I see. Would you agree that this email suggests that awareness of the risks of external fire spread as a result of cladding and insulation went beyond those individuals in the LFB with particular fire safety expertise?
I think that the timing of that email is after the Shepherd's Court fire.
Yes.
And the Commissioner, as you said earlier, had raised concerns around external walls previously.
Yes.
And so it's something that the Commissioner's office would have an understanding of, certainly at that time, given Mr Dobson's role.
Yes. So can we take it from that the risks identified on this website percolated beyond the confines of the fire safety department, your department?
Yes, I think it's fair to say that there will be people in the service who take a broader interest than maybe their core role. Right.
And in fact, it went personally to the very top of the LFB, as we see.
In this instance, yes. Mm.
Were you aware of whether there was at the time any discussion with Ron Dobson himself about the, quote, growing concerns over the cladding of buildings, as Ms Foster was suggesting was happening?
Only in so much as the work we were undertaking around Shepherd's Court and the investigation of that.
And the preparation of the slideshow I've just shown you?
Yes, but I think there was a pre-existing presentation that was being effectively updated to be used again.
Yes. Now, can I then move ahead a year to June 2017 and show you LFB 30244271? Now, this is a slideshow which bears that month, June 2017, and it's prepared by DAC Kevin Hughes, who not only held an MBA but was also, I think, also had a degree in engineering and was a fellow of the Institute of Fire Engineers, looking at his post-nominals. Is that right?
It is, yes.
So he was a very, very highly qualified fire engineer.
He was a qualified fire engineer. Yes.
All right. we can quarrel about
I'm not, I don't
the
hold
excellence
the
of his...
ability to judge to what level.
All right. Well, you had those qualifications. Very good. Now, the date of this is June 2017. There is an email at LFB 00120623. And we'll come back to the contents of this document in a moment, but I just want to show you this. This is an email that Kevin Hughes sends to you and others, Lindsay Seal, as you can see, Gareth Steele, the two individuals you mentioned earlier, on the 30th of January 2017, so some 6 months before. And it has the subject, Tall Building Conference. Steer all, I've had several conversations regarding this event, so I thought an email that pulls all of that together would be helpful. The 4th Tall Building Conference takes place at FireX, at the XL Exhibition Centre in June. Each day will have a specific theme. Tuesday, 20th of June, Design and Fire Engineering in Tall Buildings. Wednesday, 21st, Management and Insurance of Fire Risks in Tall Buildings. Thursday, 22nd, Firefighting in Tall Buildings. He then goes on to say, Russ, the organiser, has invited the LFB to contribute to the conference. Can I just ask you this? Is this correct? Was this the same Tall Buildings conference for which Kevin Hughes went on to produce the presentation that the first page of which we've just looked at?
Yes, as far as I'm aware.
Right. Now, we know that Kevin Hughes compiled the presentation before the Grenfell Tower fire happened, because we can see that he sent it to Lindsay Seal and Gareth Steele asking for some feedback on it in May. Can we just look at that? LFB 000070949. He sends that email simply saying, subject Tall Buildings Conference, June 27, 2017, would you provide some feedback, please? Now, it's right, I think, that Mr. Hughes was head of fire engineering and specialist fire safety at the time this presentation was produced, wasn't he?
Yes, he was, yes.
Yeah. Can we then go back to the presentation, page 6? That's LFB 30242771, page 6. This has the heading facade fires, and I think that's a photograph of Shepherd's Court, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yes. It says this in the speaker notes. The LFB commonly encounter facade fires. Just pausing there, do you agree that by June 2017 that was true?
I wouldn't have categorised it as commonly, no.
So you say that what Mr. Hughes is saying there is incorrect, is that right?
I wouldn't classify it as common.
So are you saying that what Mr. Hughes says there is incorrect?
Yes, I would, yes.
Right. Can you explain why Mr. Hughes would have made, given his role and given his experience, would have made an error like that?
I'm not sure if it was an error or whether it was his personal experience that he was referring to.
Well, he's talking about the brigades.
Yes, no, I completely accept that. The terminology that he chose to use is not terminology that I would have chose to use.
What would you have chosen to use?
I would say that we have some experience recently of facade fires. I'm not sure that I would quantify across the range of incidents that we attend that would amount to common.
Can we go to page 7? Testing facade panel. Do you recognise the image of the blue burning panel from the testing of panels taken from the Shepherd's Court block of flats?
Yes, I do.
Yes. And if you go to page 9, there is a photograph of a penthouse flat with a terrace and an arrow. And the arrow, if you look, is pointing to what looks like fire damage. Yes?
Yes, I can see that.
And the speaker notes say this: here we see a close-up of the building, the top of the penthouse flat on the 10th floor. What is really interesting about this is the fire actually started at the ground floor and progressed from the ground floor to 10 floors up. all behind the cladding in a very short space of time. Do you recognise this incident?
I don't know.
You don't. Now, if you go to page 11, page 10 is a photograph of the point of ignition at street level. We don't need to look at that. But if you look at page 11, this is a picture of how the fire travelled. It goes up and across, as you can see from the arrows on the photograph. It says, the slide shows how the fire travelled from street level to the 10th floor. Flammable building facades are a common challenge for the LFB. Again, would you agree with that or do you disagree with that?
No, I wouldn't agree with that, no.
So that's another error in Mr. Hughes' work, is it?
I would say it's an error in terminology.
And how would you put it?
I would say that we have some experience of it.
Right. So the difference between you in these two respects is some experience as opposed to common challenge.
Yes.
Right. Either way, it's something that the LFB would not regard as a one-off. Would that be fair?
Yes, no, I think that's fair.
Yeah. All right. Now, if we go to line 6, the speaker notes as follows. In residential buildings, the fire is not confined to the flat of origin, and our stay-put limited evacuation strategy is compromised. We're just looking at that, and we can look at other parts of it if you like, but would you agree that this is a clear indication that your department, the Fire Safety Department, was actually aware, before the Grenfell Tower fire, that stay put as a strategy may not be a suitable strategy for a high-rise block where there is non-compliant cladding?
Could you rephrase, sorry, could you ask the question again? Because I was
Yes.
considering rather than listening, so I apologise.
That's all right. Would you agree that here is a clear indication that the Fire Safety Department was aware before the Grenfell Tower fire that a stay-put strategy may not be suitable for a high-rise block which has non-compliant cladding?
I would say that certainly my opinion at the time was that stay put is absolutely incumbent on compartmentation working. That if we were to have an example where those compartments could be overwhelmed or overrun, then that would compromise stay put. Also, stay put isn't a fixed thing. It's a movable piece of guidance that talks about if you're directly affected. I'm sure, sorry, to go over old ground, I'm sure the inquiry's done some of this before. But equally, its incidents are dynamic and need to be reviewed as they progress to see if strategies and priorities maintain the same. So
Yeah.
it may well be that if a building's behaviour is changing, that then priorities need to change in line with that.
Now, what you've just told us, was that something that if I'd asked you this question in the first half of June 2017, you'd have given me the same answer?
Yes, I think as an incident commander, your role is to constantly review the dynamics of the incident, the priorities, and your performance against your goals as the incident commander to deliver your plan. And that doesn't rest with simply considering saving life. It looks at the dynamics of the fire. It looks at your progress in terms of where you set out your objectives for managing that incident.
But doesn't it follow from that the incident commander needs to know what it is that he's looking at when considering what to do with stay put in a clad high-rise?
I think the incident commander needs to take account of everything that's in front of them, yes.
He needs to know what's in front of him, doesn't
And
he?
they do need to know what's in front of them, absolutely.
And let's look and see what this slide is telling you. I picked out two parts. Let me show you some of the rest of it. If we pick up the third paragraph, it says, that's flammable building facades, cause unexpected fire spread, sometimes unseen until it breaks out again in a different location, and they often lead to fire breaking out on several floors. These type of fires can really challenge the fire strategy of a tall building. In residential buildings, the fire is not confined to the flat of origin, and our stay-put limited evacuation strategy is compromised. Large-scale evacuations in residential buildings, especially those with single staircases, cause a problem in terms of staircase capacity and obstruction to firefighters. And then there's something about commercial buildings. The reason for highlighting this is to raise awareness of the problem. I believe that the codes and fire engineering principles we use to design fire safety into buildings are excellent, but facade fires and uncontrolled spread of fire across the outside of tall buildings is a significant threat to the effectiveness of the many systems within the building. This is a vulnerability that we can design out of buildings by ensuring the limited combustibility of facades, and where any doubt exists at the design or specification stage, we should be seeking independent testing of facade materials to provide assurance that they are of limited combustibility. Now, some people may regard the timing of what I've just read to you as prophetic in many ways, but my question for you is what I've just read to you, or was what I've just read to you, not considered to be something that all watch managers who are going to be likely to be attending as first responders at high-rise fires in London should have known?
I think when you look at the words here, I can completely agree that that's an outcome that you'd like to see. I think as the lead for fire safety, I would have been looking to evidence examples of that and to put in place the appropriate awareness package. I think there is an element of proportionality that has to come into the extent to which this is an issue and the extent to which incident commanders should have it at the forefront of their mind. Now, I see the words that have been chosen here. They're not necessarily words I would have chosen myself. But having said that, I can't deny this is a presentation that was produced within the Fire Safety Department.
And to what extent was there in fact any discussion about what I've just read to you on this page here between the Fire Safety Department and the operational departments of the London Fire Brigade?
None to my knowledge.
Can you explain why that is?
No, and it's the first time I've seen this particular presentation as well.
Now, I'm going to ask you next about the extent to which the LFB had regard to fires involving cladding systems which took place overseas. AC Gary Reason told us yesterday, I think, that, in fact, as a matter of practice, the Brigade never paid any attention to what happened abroad. I may have misquoted him, but I don't think I've got the gist of what he said wrong. First, were you aware of any cladding fires in high-rise buildings overseas?
At which point? I mean, I became increasingly...
Sorry, you're quite right. Let's take from March 2016 onwards.
I think I had some awareness, but I don't think I paid a lot of attention to those issues in the role that I had previously.
And indeed, your police witness statement says, and I quote from page 2, there's no need to go back to it.
No.
I also had a general awareness of some international incidents. I cannot name any of these, but I'm aware that some instances occurred.
Yes.
Now, in your experience, were incidents overseas seen as a learning opportunity for the LFB within your department?
My Fire Safety Department or the department at the time? Sorry, to be...
The Fire Safety Department from March 16 onwards.
I think when I came into fire safety, I became aware that there were people that did take far more notice of what was going on elsewhere in the world, a more professional interest in protection matters than maybe elsewhere in the service.
And what did you take from that?
I think I took it as part of their professional interest, their professional development, that they held those issues of interest and, as I say, opportunities for development and understanding and bettering their knowledge.
Right, I may have misunderstood your answer. You say I became aware that there were people that did take far more notice of what was going on elsewhere. Do you mean people in the LFB?
In the Fire Safety Department, I think.
Right.
Sorry, when I took up that role, I think it was a department that was more attuned to learning opportunities.
Yes. And who were they? Who were the people in your Fire Safety Department who were particularly attuned to overseas incidents?
So I would say certainly the engineers. I'd say people that worked to advise me in terms of Andy Jack, Nick Coombe, people like that have been around fire safety for a long time and would routinely take an interest in incidents that looked like they were issues of protection interest.
Now, you say in your police statement, and I'm afraid this time we do have to look at it,
That's fine.
because it's a slightly longer passage. If we go to it, it's MET 307774, page 3. You say at the very top of that page, my underpinning assumption is that through building regulations in this country which control how things should be built, and such things as the standards of materials used, you cannot always make any direct comparisons to what happens in other countries. International incidents are of interest, but they do not necessarily point to potential situations here without a more detailed analysis and understanding of those incidents, how and why they occurred. Was that your... clearly that was your view. Was that just your view, or did you understand that that was the prevailing view across the brigade?
Whether it was across the brigade, I don't know. I think my point there is that we are subject to different conditions, different regulations, and so it does require us to look at what situations and what regulations applied, and were there opportunities for similar situations to rise in this country. I think that's what I'm trying to convey. I think that's probably true of people that took interest as well, was to try and understand whether the dynamics of a particular incident elsewhere held risk for us here in terms of what could be applied or couldn't be applied.
Now, you call it an underpinning assumption. Was it just that, an assumption, or was that the view arrived at after a study of any of these international fires, whether by you or by anybody else in your department?
Only in that I had an awareness that we have different regulatory regimes across different countries.
Right.
And so you cannot always make direct comparisons.
You refer here to a more detailed analysis and understanding of those incidents. Did anybody in your department ever carry out any such analysis to obtain any such understanding?
I've certainly seen documents shared from professional journals that have looked at the investigations into international incidents.
Yes, but did anybody within the LFB do it?
Did anybody have it as a role? Then no.
No. Would it have fallen to the fire engineering and regulatory specialists in the fire safety department to make comparisons between the different regulatory regimes in the UK and in other countries, so as to be able to understand any differences that might matter?
I think those individuals would have taken that opportunity to do that. Yes.
Did you know whether they did?
I know examples where they have. Yes.
Who did?
I know that Mr. Coombe, for example, would have looked at incidents and what was occurring in those places. I know some of the engineers would take that interest too.
Do you know which incidents Nick Coombe looked at?
No, I couldn't name off the top of my head, but I know it's conversations that we would have had over time.
Did it ever occur to you as Head of Fire Safety from March 2016 to assign some of your regulatory or fire engineering personnel to look into these international incidents, or perhaps some of them, to see whether there were lessons to be learnt, anything in their regulatory regime from which you could derive any comfort because of points of difference, or the opposite of comfort because of similarities, and try and derive learning from them? So
the short answer is no. I didn't ask for somebody to undertake that work, but equally I knew I had a team of people that looked at those incidents, and I knew there was a team of people there that were keeping in touch on the regulations as they applied in this country, and doing the oversight work, if you like, on the building consultations that we were consultees on.
Right. Was that work specifically commissioned, or was it just done on an ad hoc basis by those who happened to be particularly interested in it?
I'd say it's possibly ad hoc. I think maybe the people that lead that team would say it was more structured than that, but right. It was something I was aware of that took place rather than something I asked somebody to do. Yes,
and do I take it that whatever work they did not form into a formal report and make its way up to you?
No. Certainly not on this particular issue, but if, again, I go back to the report around compartmentation, that particular document drew on a lot of examples from around the country. Yes. To come to its conclusions.
Yes, and we'll come to that, I think, later. Can I ask you about a particular fire? Mm-hmm. This is the Torch Tower fire in Dubai in 2015. Can we go, please, to LFB 30241114? This is an email chain of the 22nd of February 2015. And the first email in the chain is the second, and I want to show you, is the second one on the page, from Peter Cowup to Russ Timpson, copied to Neil Orbell, and others whose names are familiar, including Danny Cotton and Graham Ellis. High-rise fire in Dubai is the subject. Importance high, dear Russ. Now, you weren't copied into this email because it predates your arrival in the fire safety department by 14 months or so, 13 months perhaps. But it does go to Neil Orbell. Did you see it as part, or did you discuss it perhaps as part of the handover that you had with him in March and April 2016?
No.
You didn't. Well, let's see how we go with it. Peter Karp says this: Dear Russ, you will no doubt be aware of the above, and I was wondering whether, through the good offices of the International Tall Building Fire Safety Network, you could put me in touch with some relevant individuals who would have been involved in and or might have first-hand knowledge of this incident. Although LFB has recently invested significant effort to improve our high-rise firefighting techniques and procedures, we are never complacent, and it is hard to imagine that an incident on this scale won't bring forward some, quote, lessons learned, unquotes. My focus would be any new issues associated with firefighting operations, and in particular, to identify whether this incident highlighted any command, procedural or tactical issues, which not already covered in the recently published UK CLG CFRA National Generic Risk Assessment and LFB's amended Standard Operating Procedure. The media reports indicate that weather, very strong winds, and falling debris were two major factors associated with the ferocity and spread of this fire. But I am conscious those dealing with this incident may, in time, be able to provide other relevant and useful information that may come of their incident debriefing and investigation process. In addition, my colleague, Assistant Commissioner Neil Orbell, will be interested in any prevention or protection issues arising from this incident. So I would also be grateful if you could bear this in mind when suggesting any contacts which you are able to offer. Now, first, who is Russ Timpson?
I believe Russ runs the Tall Buildings Conference that you referenced earlier.
Right, and what is the International Tall Buildings Fire Safety Network?
I think that is the organisation that Russ works or heads.
Do you know what it does? Or did?
My understanding generally is to share information across the sector, not just with fire and rescue services, but with developers and so on.
Right. Was it ever used by the LFB as an intelligence or learning source?
Only in so much as we supported the Tall Buildings Conference in the way that your previous emails and evidence has suggested.
Right. Were you aware of a fire at a high-rise building in Dubai called The Torch in 2015 yourself, even though you weren't yet head of the fire safety department?
I suspect I was, but I can't honestly say for certain that I did.
Right. Were you aware whether the fire safety department was gathering information about international incidents at this time?
I wasn't, no.
Did you ever discuss with Assistant Commissioner Orbell whether lessons could be learnt from international incidents as part of your handover?
No.
Do you know whether any other of the officers to whom this email was copied had such discussions, just from your knowledge?
I don't have any knowledge of that.
Did you ever have contact yourself with the International Tall Buildings Fire Safety Network about high-rise fires overseas once you became head of the Fire Safety Department in March 2016? No. I'm going to ask you about another incident, the Lacrosse Tower fire in Melbourne, Australia. Can we go, please, to LFB 000249196? Now, again, these predate your taking over the governance of the Fire Safety Department in spring 2016. This is June 2015. It's an email from Nicholas Coombe to Robert Purcell. And I want to look at the chain starting on page 3, please, first. This is an email from Nick Coombe to Robert Purcell on the 9th of June 2015. Subject, stay put. Please feel free to contact me to discuss stay put. Nick. The email subject has the subject stay put. And Nick Coombe gives his role as you can see, FSR Management Support, Audit and Performance. And FSR means, I imagine, Fire Safety Regulation.
It does, yes.
Yes. Do you know what is the role of a Fire Safety Regulation Management Support, Audit and Performance Officer?
Only in so much as that was the role that Mr. Coombe was providing to my predecessor. And it was to oversee the performance outputs of the department and report those back, and to effectively support the Assistant Commissioner
Right.
in delivery of the department plan.
Now, we can see the subject is stay put, and it's sent to Robert Purcell, and we can see if you go in the second email at the top of that page, you can see that Rob Purcell signs off as just at the very top of the page. If you scroll down a little bit, so it comes onto the screen. Thank you. The email above it is signed off by Rob Purcell. He is the acting Deputy Chief Officer of the Regional Director, Northwest Metro, Metropolitan Fire and Emergency Services Board, Albert Street, East Melbourne, Victoria, in Australia. Now, you aren't copied into these emails. Would I be right in saying you've not seen them before? Certainly didn't see them at the time, or did you? Do you think?
No, I haven't seen these.
Now, if we go to page 2, we can see Rob Purcell responds to Nick Coombe. I've shown you the bottom of the email because we now know who Mr. Purcell is. And he responds also on the 9th of June 2015 with a long email, subject re stay put. Nick, thanks very much for the quick response. I've been corresponding with Emma regarding the LFB campaign Know Your Plan and looking to understand the value and impact of the campaign and associated research that goes with it. Goes with the Brigade's position. And if you look at the 7th paragraph down, he says, just 2 paragraphs above the bottom of your screen, as you may be aware, Melbourne recently experienced a significant high-rise apartment building fire caused by poor housekeeping and non-compliant cladding on the outside of the building. I've attached a link below, but if it doesn't work, search for Lacrosse building fire, Melbourne. The apartments were also found to be overcrowded, typically by transient international students and low-paid workers. Fortunately, the building was well protected by installed fire systems, and all people were able to be evacuated quickly and without injury or, I think I should say, loss of life. Some apartments are still uninhabitable today. This type of fire is not isolated to Melbourne, as several fires have occurred across the world recently as a result of this cladding, including in China and Dubai. And then Rob Purcell goes on to link or provide a link to an ABC News story. Now, first, were you aware of the Lacrosse fire in Melbourne in 2015?
Again, I think I may have been aware of it, but I don't think I knew much in terms of the detail of it.
Was Nick Coombe still with the Fire Safety Department when you took over in March 2016 as its head?
He was, yes.
He was.
He still is.
Did you ever discuss this email or the Lacrosse Tower fire incident with Nick Coombe or anybody else in the Fire Safety Department in or after March 2016?
Not in any detail, no.
Would you have considered the Lacrosse Tower fire to be of particular interest to the LFB?
I don't think so, other than if they're, say, in the same way that mentioned earlier, if there were lessons to be learnt because there was crossovers in terms of what we could see potentially occurring in this country, then yes, of course it would be. I think it would be of general interest from a protection point of view, yes.
Can we go to LFB 3024220? This is a report from the VBA, the Victorian Building Authority, dated the 17th of February 2016, so a month only before you become head of fire safety at the LFB. Have you seen this document before?
I don't think so.
No, right. Now, we know that this document was in the LFB's possession because we have an email from Russ Timpson to Anthony Spencer of the LFB on the 4th of March 2016 attaching it. That's LFB 3070422. I think we should have that up just for completeness' sake. And you can see here's the email from Russ Timpson to Anthony Spencer. And Anthony Spencer, I think, is one of your fire engineers, isn't he? Or was?
I don't recognise the name.
You don't recognise the name. Right. And there's the email sending it to him. He attaches the report, as you can see. 3 events in the report you might be interested in. And the 4th one is Melbourne, Australia, reported to high-rise facades following Lacrosse building fire in 2014. So this report is in the LFB's possession in March 2016. I think we can agree that much.
Yes.
Yes. Now, if we go to page 2 of the report, please, can we go back to it? LFB 3024220. Page 2. It describes the fire at the Lacrosse Tower, and in the third paragraph on that page, it says this. In the case of the Lacrosse building fire, the Metropolitan Fire Brigade, MFB, identified it was the non-compliant use of the building's external cladding material that contributed most to the spread of fire. And in the next paragraph, the significance of the fire event associated with the non-compliant use of an external wall cladding material logically prompted the question, how many buildings in Melbourne have utilised external wall cladding material in a non-compliant manner? Now, and then from paragraph 5 onwards, it says the Victorian Building Authority then initiated the external wall cladding audit. The audit was designed to identify non-compliant use of external wall cladding materials in residential high-rise buildings. And then we can see at page 7 of this document the findings of the audit. And if we look at the third paragraph down from the top of that page, it says, audit finding, the rate of non-compliance was 51%. Would you agree that for anyone from the LFE reading this report, this ought to have prompted the question of whether it was possible that there were buildings in London that also used external wall cladding in a non-compliant manner?
I think it would have prompted that question, and I think at the time possibly the answer would have been that we hadn't seen the evidence of it necessarily, and that we had regulations that said it couldn't be used in buildings over that 18 metres.
Do you know whether this report was passed on to anyone within the fire safety department?
I don't know.
Right. You didn't see it presumably as part of your handover from AC Orbell in March and April 2016? No. Do you know of any action that was taken within the fire safety department in response to the issues raised in this report?
I'm not aware of any, no.
Or the Lacrosse fire more generally?
No, I'm not aware of any.
Was that a missed opportunity for the LFB to learn from another country that it is possible for widespread non-compliance with regulations to go unnoticed until there is a dangerous fire?
Without knowing what work was undertaken by the department, I'm not sure I'm in the right place to comment on whether it was a missed opportunity. It may well have been the experience of others that they did do some work around it, but I'm not aware of it.
I'm going to ask you about another fire, this time in Dubai again, on New Year's Eve 2015 at a building called the Address Tower. Were you aware of that incident?
I would have heard of that at the time, yes.
Yes. Did you learn about that incident after becoming head of the fire safety department in March 2016 or before?
I think I probably picked it up in general news.
Yes. Can we go please to LFB 3024217?
Just help me with this, if you wouldn't mind my interruption. You've said a couple of times that you thought we had robust regulatory systems in this country which would prevent this sort of thing from happening. But you've seen from the report of the fire in Victoria that they thought they had different, perhaps, but at least robust systems. But the best part of 50% of buildings hadn't complied with them. Did it cross your mind that maybe the same was going on here, that we had a robust system that people weren't complying with?
I think, well, having not seen this report, it wouldn't have crossed my mind from this. But I think certainly my experience at Shepherd Court and listening to the wider concerns around building control oversight that I think we were starting to see, certainly in the report around compartmentation that I mentioned earlier, that yes, that would have been a possibility to consider. I think there were questions previously in letters that were referenced earlier. I think that I'll probably poke in that same issue.
All right, thank you. Yes, Mr. Bennett, sorry.
Yes. Can we go to LFB 3024217, which is an email run in January 2016, a week after the Address Tower fire. And if you go to the bottom email on page 1, you can see that the email chain starts with Graham Ellis writing to Lee Drawbridge and Martin Freeman. I think that's right. And Danny Cotton as well as the CC. FYI, interesting article about flammable polyurethane and aluminium building cladding involved in the Dubai fire. You see that?
Yes.
Now, is it right that those officers were all at that time attached to the Operational Assurance Department?
I believe they were, yes.
So not in your department?
No.
No. I mean, as it then became 2 months later, not in the Fire Safety Department.
Not on the Fire Safety
No.
Department.
Now, Lee Drawbridge was later promoted to Deputy Assistant Commissioner, DAC, and then moved to the Fire Safety Department as Head of Fire Safety Delivery, I think.
Yes.
Yes. When was that?
I think it was around June 17, I think.
Now, the bottom email from Graham Ellis I've just read to you, and he provides a link to an article on a site called IFSEC Global. And in the middle email, if you go up the page, please, you can see, and this is the email timed at 15:07 on the 7th of January, Tony Biles, who I think is Group Manager National Resilience CBRNE team, says, always knew clause 12.7 would be used somewhere by someone, relied on it heavily throughout my career. First, Tony Biles and CBRNE team. What is that, the CBRNE team?
So CBRN is part of our counter-terrorism type arrangements.
Right.
And it's also our response to hazardous material type incidents as well.
I see.
So it stands for chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear.
Right. Now, I mean, we don't see that on the screen. Perhaps we should just, if we can just scroll up, you'll see it. This email carries the CFOA National Resilience badge. We just scroll up a little bit. You can see it there. Does that tell us? But Tony Biles' email address is Fire Resilience, and also Tony Biles at Met, and also Tony Biles at londonfire.gov. He seemed to have a lot of emails across a lot of different entities. Who was he? Do you know?
Yes, Group Manager in London Fire Brigade, met him on a number of occasions.
Right.
As to the role he was performing, particularly at this time, he was working across partner groups as part of that role, because it's formed from a multi-agency background.
Yes, I see. Now, where he says 12.7, of course, you're not copied in on this email at all, but would you take it, well, is it the case that he was referring there to section 12.7 of approved document B?
I'm not sure that he
You
is.
don't know.
I don't know that.
Did you know that approved document B, paragraph 12.7, is the requirement for insulation products used in external walls of buildings in excess of 18 metres to be of limited combustibility?
I know what you've just said, but I wouldn't have referenced it or known it to be at 12.7.
Right. Do you know why Tony Biles, or in what context Tony Biles would have, as he puts it, relied on it heavily throughout my career? What's he talking about? Do you know?
I don't, but I suggest it's
Right.
possibly a tongue-in-cheek comment.
Right. We may have to pursue that with another witness. But the response at the top from Danielle Cotton, who at this time is still at this time Director of Safety and Assurance, says, I'm surprised it's taken them so long to reference such a key piece of information. I don't know whether she's referring to the article or to 12.7. Can you help with that?
I'm sorry, I can't.
You can't. Standing back, do you consider that this incident, this type of incident, this fire in Dubai, would be a learning opportunity for the LFB?
I think all fires provide learning opportunities. But as I said, I think in my police statement, they need to be put into the context of further analysis to understand to what extent they may be an issue here.
And so far as this fire is concerned, the torch fire in Dubai, was any analysis undertaken by anybody in the Fire Safety Department, to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge.
Right. And when you worked with Lee Drawbridge in the Fire Safety Department, did you ever discuss the address tower incident or other overseas fires involving cladding?
Not that I can remember.
What about section 12.7 of approved document B? Did you ever discuss that with Lee Drawbridge?
No.
Now, before the Grenfell Tower fire, what was the attitude or the approach in the LFB that an incident such as the address fire couldn't happen in this country because of our regulations, and specifically because of section 12.7 of approved document B, which is the requirement for materials of limited combustibility to be used in external wall constructions.
I don't know if it was an overriding attitude. I think it would have been a consideration for people in terms of their knowledge. I think those that may be closer to some of the arrangements may have had their doubts. I think there were doubts raised. To say, when I joined fire safety, one of the documents that was sitting in the tray for me to address expressed doubts about compartmentation, for example.
Yeah, I see. To your knowledge, after March 2016, when you took over as head of fire safety, or before that, if you knew, did anybody actually sit down with the findings from the torch fire in Dubai, approved document B, and whatever the governing building regulations in Dubai were, in order to see whether or not it is the case that it couldn't happen here, or whether there were actually learning points that could be derived from that fire, which might enable a better understanding of whether there were any weaknesses in approved document B?
Not to my knowledge.
Do you know why that is?
No, as I say, it's not to my knowledge. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I don't have any knowledge of it.
I see what you mean. Now, is it fair to say that these incidents, the address tower, the torch tower, both in Dubai, and the Lacrosse tower in Melbourne, all came across the LFB's desk, as it were, in one form or another, but little action, little investigation was undertaken as a result?
I think I would agree with the first part, that it's clearly come into LFB's possession. But as I said, I can't quantify what action was taken because I wasn't there at the time. But to my knowledge, and I'm not trying to be difficult here, I think it is just in full context. I don't want to suggest that nobody did work if they did, but I don't have any knowledge of that.
No, absolutely. But would this be fair, that if anybody had done any important work with any important lessons which had been drawn from them, as far as you would have known about it, at least once you took over as head of fire safety in March 2016? No,
I think it's fair to say that I would have expected to know, and if the learning was for the organisation to have known before taking over fire safety.
Now, I want to ask you about a conference in the UAE, or rather about the UAE, in November 2016. There was a conference called the United Arab Emirates Fire Safety Delivery 2016, which I think was held by the LFB on the 16th and 17th of November 2016, with a number of attendees from the UAE there. Do you remember that?
I have a vague recollection.
Were you there?
I don't think I was, no. I might have greeted a contingent when they arrived, but I don't think I was there at the actual conference.
I think that actually may be correct. Can we go to LFB 00120380? This is the timetable for the programme for the conference. Fire Safety Delivery 2016, dates booked for fire safety, 16th and 17th November 2016. The first day at Union Street, the second day at Plasto Fire Station Community Room. If you look down to the bottom of page 1, you'll see that the item third from bottom for day 2, so this is the 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock slot in the day, was entitled Fire Engineering, High-Rise External Fire Spread and Theory of the Shard, to be given by James Flynn and Gareth Steele. Do you know, standing back a little bit, why were the UAE, why was the UAE chosen for the theme of the conference?
I believe it was a request from the UAE to attend LFB. Now I've seen the agenda, I do have a better recollection of it, and I do remember it not being a particularly successful venture. I'm not quite sure that the people that we received were necessarily the people we thought we were going to receive.
Right. Did the fact that delegates of whatever quality or seniority from the UAE wanted to attend the LFB not tell you something about what was happening in the UAE from which the LFB themselves could learn?
I think maybe had there been a had it been a better experience, then maybe there was. I think it's safe to say that it wasn't an experience we were going to be rushing to repeat. And I don't really want to say much more than that, but it wasn't a meeting of joint professionals to share joint experience. It's probably the safest way I can categorise that.
That's a diplomatic answer, and probably a little bit too diplomatic for my insensitivities. Perhaps you could explain a bit more bluntly what you mean.
I don't think that the professional reception and agenda that was provided was met by equally professional individuals that were there for the learning.
Right. What role did the series of high-rise cladding fires, such as the address and the torch, play in the decision to hold this conference to start with, or was it just a response to a request?
It was a response to a request. I mean, I do know we've had similar requests, not just to fire safety, but to London Fire Brigade generally from other fire services around the world.
Okay.
I think it is just part of the makeup of London Fire Brigade that attracts people to come and look to see how London works and the challenges that London faces.
Was there at all a detailed discussion of materials used in cladding systems, compliance with ADB and current risks highlighted from the UAE fires at this conference?
I don't know,
You don't know.
the detail of what was covered.
Right.
As I say, I wasn't there.
Can we then turn to LFB 00120381? This is a timetable for a 3-week course, 15 days. Now we understand that this course was provided by the LFB and Babcock jointly as a collaboration exercise. And I think you could see that from what's on the screen. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
In the fourth column of the course timetable, you can see the activities for day 4 at Beckton, Babcock to lead, reflective learning, flexible, see? Mm-hmm. And the guest speaker and case study, incident command decision making and tactical planning, high-rise firefighting incident command exercise, 15R simulation number 2, first bullet point, UAE-based high-rise fire scenario. Now, looking at column 5, there's another simulation, also first bullet point, UAE-based high-rise fire scenario. Now, we don't hold a copy of those training materials associated with this course. Do you know whether any of those scenarios included external fire-spreading cladding systems?
No, I don't have any knowledge of any of those scenarios.
You don't know?
I have no knowledge of those scenarios. No.
Given that there had been a series of cladding fires in the UAE in recent years before this conference, does that explain, to the best of your knowledge, the presence in this programme of a UAE-based high-rise fire scenario?
I can only assume, and it is an assumption looking at that given the candidates were from that country, it was to try and provide instant command thinking and support around the scenarios that they may have faced.
Right. Does this tell us that the LFB had carried out some kind, at least, of close analysis of the UAE fires, or some UAE fires, and had been able to put together a UAE high-rise fire scenario on the basis of what they knew?
I'm afraid, based on having just seen this today, I don't know whether that's from LFB engagement or Babcock or a collaborative piece. I would assume it's a collaborative piece, and in that case, the answer to your question would be yes.
Right. Now, do you know who this training was delivered to?
I'm assuming it's part of the contingent you just talked about.
Right. I see. Do you know why these training materials weren't delivered to the NFB's own operational staff, or were they?
No, I've no idea whether they actually got presented as part of this visit or any time since.
Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment? We're going to turn to a slightly different topic.
Yes, I think it is. We'll have a short break at this point, Mr. Daly. We'll come back at 25 to 4, please. And again, don't discuss your evidence with anyone outside the room.
Okay,
Please.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. 25 to 4, please. Would you ask Mr. Daly to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Daly, ready to carry on?
Yes, absolutely.
Good, thank you. Yes, Mr.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I want to ask you now some questions about learning lessons from other London fires, particularly high-rise fires. And I want to begin with a topic, namely the high-rise fire at Madingley on the Cambridge Road estate in Kingston upon Thames in July 2010. Were you familiar with that incident?
No, I'm not.
Not. Now, we've had a bundle of documents given to us by the LFB about that event, LFB 30288515. I wonder if I can just take you to it quickly and see how much you can help us with it. This is a data collection form for the event. And you can see section 1, Farinor data collection, to be updated at each inspection, shaded fields are mandatory, etc. And then you can see there's a file name and building name, Madingley, St Peter's Road, Cambridge Road Estate, Kingston, Surrey. And there are some details about the building. And if you go to page 13 of this, there's a general fire safety form there. Report details. A 20-pump fire occurred in a 17-storey purpose-built block of flats containing 60 flats on the upper 15 storeys. The block comprised a single staircase, a firefighting shaft and firefighting lift with a DRM, that is dry rising main. The fire started within flat 48 on the 12th floor, spreading upwards to seriously damage the flats immediately above on the 13th, 14th and 15th floors. Now, just pausing there, Bureau Veritas carried out a test of materials from the exterior of the building, and then they produced a report of the 14th of September 2010. That is in this same bundle at page 91. If we can just go to that, please. You can see the first page of it. And there it is. And if we go within that report to page 92, paragraph 2.2, you can see that the report says SD03 fascia panel from flat 3 balcony, 2 sections of white GRP fascia panel. No indication of flame retardant was found in the exterior gel coat or the GRP bulk. The panel had no resistance to ignition, and once ignited it continued to burn and spread flame, producing large amounts of dense black smoke. The second and duplicate sample for reference retention was not examined. If you go to 2.3 below it, it goes on. 2 pieces of white 18mm thick expanded polystyrene bead board, no flame, no added flame retardant was found, and the material had no resistance to ignition, continued to burn once ignited, spread flame rapidly, and shrank away from heat, producing large volumes of dense black smoke. The second duplicate sample for reference stroke retention was not examined. And then 2.5 talks about the UPVC window frame and says in the second sentence, black rubber seal stroke gaskets had no resistance to ignition and once ignited to continue to burn and spread flame, producing dense black smoke. And the 2.6 castellated roof fascia panel, a white box profile was identified as GRP with a smooth gel coat, exposed surface and random glass reinforced core and rear surface. The typical nominal thickness was 4 millimetres, and no evidence was found of any flame retardant additive. The panel had no resistance to ignition, and once ignited it continued to burn and spread flame, producing large volumes of dense black smoke. The glass reinforcement tended to keep the panel reasonably rigid whilst burning. And at page 94 at paragraph 4.4, there's a comment on the castellated roof panels, which say that they remain part of the external envelope of the building that could provide a medium for fire spread and may therefore be a risk to health and safety. It could have been ignited by a fire starting in a top-level flat or, as in this case, spreading to the top level. It could then spread fire around the roof edges where it could be difficult to control or extinguish. One mechanism for danger would be from falling debris from this product spreading fire downwards and causing a risk to health and safety of those escaping or firefighting below. The large amounts of smoke produced by the burning of this product are also considered a risk to health and safety because of the overall amounts present and the wide distribution of roof fascia panels around the roof edge. Now, I've read you quite a bit of this, although it's technical in some respects. Would you agree that it appears from these findings by Bureau Veritas that the materials used on the facade of the Madingley block in Kingston in 2010 were not fire resistant and could allow fire to spread?
Yes, I think that's clear from the report, yes.
Yes, and the same that could be said for polystyrene insulation, the UPVC window frames and the roof panels, the castellated roof panels.
Yes.
Now, that's clear from the reading. Did you ever look at this document at any stage?
I've never seen this document.
You've never seen this document. Could we please go to LFB 000 28515, page 64. Same document run, page 64. This is an email of the 23rd of July 2010, so shortly after the fire, but before the fire investigation report was produced. And it's sent to Stephen Walker, Steve Churrick and Dave Kennett with the subject, Marie Madingley, external fire spread, and then there's an incident number. And in the email, in the first paragraph, Mr. Firkins, who is Fire Engineering Group of the LFEPA, says this: having viewed the CCTV footage recently obtained by John Elwell, there appears to have been an unusual amount of smoke generated. The smoke volume and colour is similar on all 4 fire floors, suggesting that it is predominantly coming from the building fabric rather than contents of individual occupancies. I've left the DVD on Steve Churrick's desk. Now, he then goes on to say in the third paragraph, the key issues seem to be: 1, whether a similar occurrence could happen. If a fire occurred on a lower floor, it would affect more residents and may have a greater impact on the escape stair. Steve Walker advises that the Madingley block is currently unoccupied. There are, however, 3 similar blocks. Without knowing the exact fire development mechanism or if the other blocks have similar materials, it is important not to jump to conclusions, but we may want to advise, as an interim measure, that early evacuation of the building should be considered rather than defend in place. An increase in the PDA may be justified to support this. Now, do I take it that you yourself have never seen this email?
I haven't, no.
No. Even when you came in as head of safety, this wouldn't have been in a pack that you would have seen, is that right?
No, it wasn't part of any pack.
Now, one can read this document, but is it right that what Mr. Firkins is saying is that a change to stay put due to the possibility that the sister blocks which were occupied might be at risk of external fire spread should be considered?
I think if Mr. Firkins, who I know to have been a fire safety officer, came to that conclusion, then I'd have to take heed of his advice as a fire safety professional.
Do you know, was it the position or view of the LFB at that time, so this is summer 2010, that where there was a risk of rapid external fire spread due to the materials used in the facade of a high-rise building, changing the stay-put policy, in whole or in part, might be the appropriate step to take?
So a couple of things. One, I don't know if that was a consideration for LFB, but of course the evacuation strategy is something for consideration by the responsible person for the building. I think if LFB had concerns, then those concerns should be shared with the RP as to why they felt that stay put may not be appropriate given the other factors affecting that building. So I would expect it to be a dialogue, but the decision ultimately sits with the RP. But there has to be, the fire risk assessment would need to support that strategy. And if LFB wasn't comfortable in that in the regulatory role, then it has the remit to take action
Right.
on that.
Do I understand from that answer that where a stay put would not remain in place in the event of an external fire spread such as that is recorded as happening at Madingley, then it was up to the building owner to introduce arrangements so as to facilitate significant partial or total evacuation of the building?
Yes, so it's the RP's responsibility in terms of the evacuation strategy that's informed by the fire risk assessment. Now, there will be a view from the fire service, particularly because of the post-fire findings here, to suggest that there are issues affecting the continuation of stay put. And then if the RP was able to put in interim measures to the satisfaction of the fire service that made stay put still viable and sustainable, then that would be a way of maintaining the evacuation strategy.
Right.
If they couldn't, then it may well be that they would need to change the strategy for that building, much in the same way as we're seeing now with a number of buildings as part of the risk review of high-rise buildings across not just London but the country.
Right. Had you ever come across, before June 2017, an instance where the responsible person for a high-rise residential block of flats had in place an evacuation strategy which could be switched to in the event that the stay put policy for that building had to be changed?
No, not in a dynamic context. I think the example I would point to is the sister block to Lackenau House. So given the circumstances at Lackenau House, they were replicated in the sister block Marie Curie House. And in conjunction with the local authority at the time, they put a wake-in watch in place to provide the facility of raising early alarm in the event of a fire because of the compromises within the building that were similar to those in Lackenau House. So that's one example where evacuation strategy was supported by additional measures. Had those measures not been sufficient, then it may well have required either the decanting of that block or a separate strategy in terms of simultaneous evacuation.
Yes. Are you aware of what the LFB's understanding was at the time of the Madingley fire, summer 2010, about whether the LFB had enforcement powers in relation to problems which had emerged with the facade panels?
I don't think it wasn't my role in fire safety, and it's not something I would have considered, no.
Can we go to page 127 in this bundle, please? This is an email of 7th of October 2010 from Stephen Walker to Andy Jack. And Stephen Walker, just to be clear for you, was the team leader of the Merton, Wandsworth and Kingston fire safety team, I think. And the subject of the meeting, or email, is Madingley meeting 7th of October 2010. Now, it's a long email, and I'll just tell you. In it, he, Stephen Walker, summarises a meeting he had attended with the officials from the Royal Borough of Kingston, RBK. In the third paragraph, he says, and I'll show it to you, I then ran through the points that must be considered in a risk assessment of the other similar blocks, or before this block is reoccupied. 1, rapid vertical fire spread. 2, fire spread onto the roof and associated issues with the protection of the FF lift motor room and prevention of debris falling from the roof onto the escape routes. 3, fire and smoke ingress into the single stair means of escape. 4, clear signage to the dry rising main. This was then discussed. And then he says, I then confirmed that we had a duty to investigate this incident and were considering enforcement under fire safety law, and it was likely that an enforcement notice would be served. And we were considering if there were grounds for prosecution, etc. And then Ian Clements asked if an enforcement notice was necessary if the council put in place an action plan to mitigate the risk. I said this would be taken into consideration. Now, again, I'm going to assume you knew nothing of this email or the discussions, but would you agree with me that it appears from this that the LFB raised the possibility of enforcement action and indeed prosecution with the local authority in order to encourage them to take the matter seriously? That's what it looks like.
Yes, no, I think that's a fair summary of what's there, and echoes to a certain degree circumstances that I've been in personally with regards to the Chalcott's estate in Camden.
Right. Now, Gareth Steele is copied into this email and other emails in the bundle regarding the response to the Madingley fire. Gareth Steele, I think, remained a member of the fire safety department at the time of the Grenfell Tower fire, didn't he?
Yes, and he still
So he was part of your department?
Yes.
Once you took it over in March 16, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Were you his direct line manager at that time? He was, I think, one of your senior fire engineers.
Yes, so he would have reported to the Deputy Assistant Commissioner with responsibility for the special teams, fire engineering team. Say special teams, sorry.
Right. And do you recall ever having discussed the Madingley fire with Gareth Steele?
No, I don't.
And would it follow you don't just recall discussing it with anybody else in the fire safety department?
No, I don't.
Would you agree with me that the issues raised by the Madingley fire, including fire spread in external panels and insulation, was rightly a matter of concern for the LFB?
I think there are definitely issues here that are of concern and that prompts opportunities for learning. I think if it helps, in my statement, I think I've made the point that I'm not sure we've always taken every opportunity to learn as an organisation. I think that's a matter of record in my statement. So if what we are looking at here is examples of where you're demonstrating that, then I think that's something that I've conceded in my statement anyway, that protection wasn't always as high up the agenda as it needed to be, and so the opportunities to learn from protection haven't always been as well addressed. I think we're better now. I think we were on the path to improving that, and I think we're better nationally on that regard as well through the work we're doing currently.
So the Madingley fire you would accept as a good example of a learning event for the LFB where no learning or insufficient learning was taken?
I don't know that no learning was done, but as an officer in the brigade at that time, I should have known about something related to this fire from what you've demonstrated that I wasn't aware of until today.
Thank you. Now I'm going to go back to Shepherd's Court, as I said I would. The Shepherd's Court fire, just to reorientate you in the chronology, happened on the 19th of August in the afternoon of 2016. And I think you attended that incident.
I did, yes. I was incident commander at the end of it.
Yes, and I think you were the senior most incident commander, weren't you?
Yes, I was monitored by Mr Dobson. So we have a monitoring officer role who would be the most senior for us on the fire ground. And I was the last incident commander of that incident.
Yes, and just a little bit of background. I'm right, I think, that Shepherd's Court is a purpose-built high-rise block of flats.
It is, yes.
Sitting in fact, in the London borough of Hammersmith and Fulham.
Yes.
And the fire started in a flat on the 7th floor in a faulty white goods appliance.
Yes.
And then I think fire penetrated the window and spread vertically up the exterior of the building as far as the 11th floor. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Now we'll get to the detail, but in outline, is it right that but there were these panels installed around the windows, which the subsequent fire investigation found used or were comprised of combustible polystyrene insulation?
Yes, the exact makeup I don't recall, but there was an issue with them, yes.
Well, we'll come on to the fire investigation reports in a little bit of detail later on in your evidence, but in summary, do you remember that the investigation found that this combustible insulation contributed to the external fire spread?
Yes, I think at testing it showed that the panels delaminated, exposing the flammable core, and then that sustained external fire spread.
And at the time of that incident, had you personally experienced that kind of external fire spread before?
I don't think so. I mean, you may correct me if I've said differently in my statement, but I don't think I had. But I was aware of it from the Lackenau house fire. But I didn't attend that incident. It was something that the learning from that had been shared, and I was aware from that perspective.
And at the time of that incident, was it an incident that your training as a firefighter and incident commander had equipped you, prepared you to deal with?
Yes, I felt so.
You felt so?
Yes.
Now, let's go to your statement, your first witness statement, please. LFB 3032306, page 17. And let's look at paragraph 77. In the last paragraph, in the last part of 17, you say, in my opinion, the incident had similarities with the Lackenau house fire, in that it was the spandrel panels that had aided the external fire spread and fire spread back into other floors, was greater where windows were open. As such, this did not appear to be a new hazard to me. Awareness of external fire spread is referenced in our high-rise firefighting policy. And you go on to explain that in a bit more detail. Now, if we go to your police statement, let's look at that. This is MET 3077774 at page 4, paragraph 2. You say there, with my fire safety background, I felt that there was something unusual about that fire spread. Can you explain what you mean in both these statements? Was this fire spread nothing new, or was it an unusual?
So I think in the first statement, I'm saying it wasn't beyond my experience, if you like, particularly from references back to Lackenau House. When I use the term unusual, it's we wouldn't expect to see panels usually supporting sustained fire spread. So it's unusual in that it shouldn't be happening on a building of that height, but not beyond my experience.
Well,
That
I think we
helps
can
explain
agree.
the two.
Yes, I think we can agree that it shouldn't. My question is, if it's unusual, as you say it was, what was it about your fire safety background that prompted you to think that the fire spread was unusual?
I think, again, I mentioned in one of my statements that areas of fire safety and protection concern became more of an issue for me when I took that reference on. I think as an incident commander, my protection learning gave me more options, and I think attuned me to some of those factors that maybe in my earlier career I wasn't maybe as quick to think about in the earlier part of an incident.
Right. So is it a little bit like we saw before, not uncommon, uncommon, but not a one-off?
Yeah, I didn't see this as a one-off,
No.
but it was a fire spread that we shouldn't expect to see.
Now, you say in your statement at page 18, if we can go to that, this statement, in the second last paragraph on that page, we go to the bottom of page 18, you say, I do believe that fire safety knowledge has an important role to play as an incident. Since holding the role of Assistant Commissioner of Fire Safety, I think I'm a better incident commander because of the enhanced knowledge of fire safety. I think it gives me more options in terms of my operational decision making. It is one of the reasons we are bringing fire safety training back to operational crews. It is something that fire services nationally had stopped doing years ago, which is now coming back. Can you just explain first what you mean by more options there? Can you give some examples?
I think that I would more readily consider the facilities available to me in a particular building, particular design. I think I would consider the passive fire safety measures in a building more readily now. More I would access that information, I suppose, in my initial decision making more readily than I had done earlier in my career. I think it took me back to some of the work I did as a firefighter early doors when I talked about doing fire safety checks. I think it's why I personally have felt since taking over the department that it was an important area of firefighters' knowledge that I wanted to bring back. And when I say services had stopped doing it nationally, I mean generally there are some services that have kept that out of necessity. But as a general rule, lots of services, when the change from the FPA to first place, the workplace regs and then the RRO, that was coincided with lots of services not carrying out regulatory fire safety functions with frontline crews.
Right. I'm very sorry to have to ask you again, Mr. Daly, but might you be able to slow down a little bit?
Yes, apologies.
Our transcriber can get down what you're saying. We had a few inaudibles in that answer.
Sorry.
And we don't want to have those if we can avoid them. Now, are you able to give us some examples of situations where your fire safety knowledge made you a better incident commander?
I can think of an incident in a large warehouse in Tottenham in North London where the fire was spreading throughout the building, through the fire loading in the building, to an extent overrunning the efforts to suppress the fire. And I think when I arrived, I immediately turned to the plans of the building to look to see what level of compartmentation was afforded, which isn't usual within warehouses, but there is occasionally some of those things. And I was able to draw on a clear compartment line and then start to dictate tactics for the operational tactics through the operational commander to employ that would take advantage of that particular feature of the building design, slowing the spread of the fire and enable us to put resources in place beyond that to then suppress the fire. That's the one that comes to mind.
Right. Now, you mentioned Chalcuts earlier. Was that a fire?
It wasn't in response to a fire. Right. They have had fires there in the past. Chalcuts was part of the work we were asked to undertake, as all fire and rescue services were, direction from government to check high-rise residential premises in the immediate aftermath of the Grenfell Tower fire.
Right, okay. Now, going back to Shepherd's Court, I think it's right, isn't it, that by the time you arrived at the incident, the fire spread was under control?
Yes, the dynamic phase of the incident had been dealt with under the direction of DAC Hearn.
Yes, and you say, I don't think we need to go back to it, but it's page 4, that by the time you got onto the command unit, DAC Hearn had already put in place a number of things where crews were operating across a number of floors, getting ahead of the fire and making those interventions before it could spread further. Now, it's right, I think, that fire investigators also attended the Shepherd's Court fire, didn't they?
They did, yes.
And that was, you say, normal?
For an incident of that size, they would have been mobilised to the
right.
incident, yes.
And if we go, well, we don't need to, I don't think. You say in your statement of paragraph 2 that you refer to one of your fire safety officers being there, who was also a fire engineer. Do you know who that was?
Yes, it was Jim Flynn.
Jim Flynn. And you say also in your statement, let's look at page 4 for this, paragraph 2. Page 4. Paragraph 2. You say in the middle of the paragraph, I asked him to link up with the fire investigator and asked him to look at why the spandrel panels appear to have spread the fire. The spandrel panels are the insulating panels that sit below the glazing in the UPVC window setting. Would you have expected that to have been done if you hadn't suggested it?
When I spoke to Jim Flynn, who was there in a capacity as a senior fire safety officer, he had already made that consideration and was bringing that consideration, I think, back to the command unit. And so I think our interaction kind of intersected his intentions to bring that to the awareness of the incident commander and my intentions to bring it to his. So together we were of a similar mind.
Oh, I see. Okay. So he'd already thought to do it, but you confirmed it.
Yes.
Is I think what you're telling us.
Yes, I think that's a fair summary.
Now, you have explained in your police statement, mainly to look at it, it is page 13, that the LFB has a process of debriefing fire crews and incident commanders after an incident, and we know those to be, I think, a PRO, performance review of operations, for firefighters, and a PRC, performance review of command, for incident commanders. Yes?
Yes, that's correct.
And the PRO will also look at the dynamic decision-making on arrival and the initial tactics at that level.
Yes, it will, yes.
And the PRC, I think, as you've explained, is for the chain of command, and that's the first incident commander all the way through to the ultimate, the final incident commander, and the monitoring officer. And you also go on to explain that the PRC is independently chaired, and the chair would ask each incident commander to talk their way through the incident with references to the decision-making model. And you examine at what point the decisions are made, why particular decisions are made, and that's all examined all the way through the command chain. Is that a fair way of describing it?
Yeah, that's a fair description, yes.
What role does the fire safety department play in a PRC, performance review of command?
So the PRC would normally involve, from the initial call into the brigade, so it can involve the control operators and then the incident commanders, but the chair of the PRC can call into the PRC any other officers that they feel have contributions that are valuable to the PRC process.
And if we go to your statement at page 14, please. You say this, at the conclusion of this, everybody leaves the room apart from the chair, the support officer and the minute taker. They would consider all the evidence that has been presented. Once they've done so, they will reconvene in open forum and share any learning with each IC in turn. This does not mean that there will be particular feedback or learning for each IC. Sometimes the feedback is that you did exactly what we expected you to do, nothing exceptional, nothing developmental. And then you say this, if there was any advisory points that an individual would be told, if there was something that fundamentally required some development for an individual, that would generate a personal development record which their line manager would then address and manage through to completion. The learning is delivered and shared openly in that meeting. Equally, any organisational learning is also recorded and taken away for action through the operational review team as well. So there should have been some organisational learning recorded for Shepherd's Court in terms of the issues that I've raised earlier in this statement. I do not recall if there was any specific exceptional items or development items for any of the ICs in the PRC for Shepherd's Court. Now, is there a risk that an incident commander's concern about being given or potentially being given a personal development record might distort the evidence that he or she might give to the PRC or to the chairperson?
I think that has to be accepted. That may well be a risk, yes.
And when you refer to organisational learning here in terms of the issues that you've raised earlier in this statement? What are you referring to?
So an organisational learning point could be something to do with the resources that were sent to the incident, delays in mobilisation, deficiencies in the kit and equipment that may be used at that incident. In this particular example, it may well be around the fire spread that was witnessed at the time, if it was deemed to be new or novel for the service.
What organisational learning points can you recall you considered that the Shepherd's Court fire had raised?
I don't recall seeing the end products, and I can't remember what was on those. But in terms of the fire spread issue, we were in ongoing dialogue around how we were going to follow up that learning, because there was something for me in how much of this type of arrangement I'd seen in buildings across London, and so notifying local authorities around the concerns that gave to me and to the department. But then equally, as that developed, understanding to what extent this was an issue for firefighters across London would inform some learning opportunities.
Now, we've seen a copy of the IMP report for the Shepherd's Court incident, and that is LFB 001209998. Can we please have that up? IMP, I think you'll agree, stands for Incident Monitoring Process.
Yes.
And while that comes up, just confirm, it's right, isn't it, that any relevant individual or organisational conclusions or findings from the PRO or PRC process get recorded onto the IMP report for the incident?
Yes, they should, yes.
Yes. Now, this is the IMP report on the screen in front of you for Shepherd's Court. Have you seen it before?
Yes, I have seen this, actually.
Right. Cast your eye down it, if you would. Note the first one. Development. Comment. No pickle was available on the canteen van. This lessened the enjoyment of my corned beef sandwich. Now, I mean, was it normal that an IMP report would solemnly record a senior officer's offhand joke?
Absolutely not, no.
Can you account for that being there?
I can't account for it, but I know that the individual was dealt with in regards to that particular statement.
Right.
As I understand it.
Right. I mean, there is a serious point lurking here, which is the question: is it right that some senior officers, such as this one, might have regarded the process of IMP as something of a joke, or to be taken less seriously than it ought?
No, I think this actually, in terms of that individual, it's because they were about to retire imminently, and so I think it was
right,
a misplaced attempt at humour at best.
Now, leaving aside that piece of misplaced humour, would you agree that there is no reference on this report to the fact that this was an incident involving external fire spread as a result of combustible spandrel panels?
Yes, it's not there.
No. Would you expect an IMP report to record information of that kind?
If it was organisational learning that needed to be followed up on, then it's the appropriate place for that learning to sit. I can't recall exactly how the PRC ran, and it may well be that the chair of the PRC felt that the issue was already in hand in terms of the work that was ongoing in the fire safety department and the conversations with colleagues in ops policy around potential sharing of that information through operational news.
Do you know why there was no reference to combustible spandrel panels in this IMP?
No, I don't. So I can't remember the conversation that took place at the PRC.
Right. If there weren't, as we see there wasn't, how else would you expect such information to be recorded and disseminated for future learning?
So, as I say, I think the chair may well have taken the view that there was already, that the issue didn't need to be recorded here because it was already being picked up elsewhere. That's one possibility, but again, I can't speak for the chair in this occasion.
Right.
But I do know that I would have conveyed at the PRC the work that we were undertaking in the department in terms of considering the information initially to Hammersmith and Fulham, but then to the wider London local authorities about the concerns of this type of arrangement in a building, and then to understand the extent to which, because although they may look similar, they may not actually be constructed similarly, understand the extent to which this offered learning for operational crews. And ultimately, that learning did emerge, but I think you will probably undoubtedly move on to at some time later.
Indeed.
Too late.
we come to it.
Yeah.
This is the 6th of April 2017 letter to the local
Yes.
authorities you're referring to. We will come back to that.
Yeah.
Before we do, I just want to ask you now some detailed questions about the LFB's investigation into the Shepherd's Court fire. Now, is it right, do you recall, that samples of the Shepherd's Court panels, the spandrel panels, were provided to Bureau Veritas, who examined them and carried out tests on them between the 30th of August 2016?
Yes.
Yes, and that's recorded in the subsequent report, which we're going to look at in a moment. Before we do, can I show you some emails? This is LFB 30552135. And I'm going to show you here a chain of emails between members of the Fire Safety Department, which you can see there. Now, if we go down to page 6, please, we'll start with the earliest email in the chain. This is from, we need to see, I think, the very bottom, sorry, the very top of, the very top of, start again. The very bottom of page 5, where you have it, Charles Romeyer, 1st of September 2016, to Charlie Pugsley, copied to Lindsay Seal, Jim Flynn, Colette O'Hara, John Sutherland and Gareth Steele. If we go down to the top of page 7, we can see who Charles Romeyer is. Top of page 7, this is a long email that straddles the 3 pages, I'm afraid. If we go to page 7, we can see that he is, in fact, called Charles Ellie Romeyer, and he has some post-nominals. He is a fire engineer in the fire engineering department.
He was, yes.
He was. Now, if we go to the bottom of page 5, and then we'll roll into the text of the email, he calls the subject of the email Test Witnessing Summary. You can see that. And then he says, Charlie, please find below a summary of the testing carried out. And then he proceeds to do that. And if you go to the 3rd paragraph from the bottom of page 6, he says this, and this is the paragraph above the yellow. In conclusion, the test revealed that the insulation provided in the sandwich panel was made out of polystyrene. The tests demonstrated that once the metal fascia was removed, the insulation, as well as the wooden backing, was contributing to the combustion process, increasing significantly the size of the flames as well as the size of the burnt area. It is therefore the fire engineering group opinion that the responsible person for this building needs to demonstrate compliance with applicable guidance. This can be achieved through the provision of the appropriate certification. It is likely that further testing is required to determine if the sandwich panel is of limited combustibility or is able to achieve the required performance when tested in accordance with BS 8414 Part 1 and 2. These tests are full-scale and enable the system to be tested in its entirety. Now, the opinion that I've read to you here in full was reached within a couple of days of the tests being witnessed, it seems. Is that right?
Yes, it looks so from the dates.
It looks like it, because we can see from the top of the email that the test happened on the 29th and 30th of August. Now, you're not copied into this email, but were you aware of this conclusion at this stage?
I'm not sure I was aware of this conclusion, but I certainly was aware that initial findings had been shared with individuals in the team, and so it's not an unreasonable conclusion for them to draw.
Right.
But before we move forward, there was a second, I believe, a second series of testing to substantiate the initial test results.
Now, after the testing of the panel from Shepherd's Court in August 2016, as we've just seen, the tall buildings facades presentation, which we looked at earlier, was updated, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Now, let's look at David Green's witness statement again. Mm-hmm. It's LFB 3032917. This time, let's look at page 5, paragraph 23. He says there, on 4th of October 2016, I presented a modified version of the tall buildings facades presentation at the Senior Fire Safety Officers SFSO CP Day. And he explains that SFSOs are operational, flexible duty staff members in the role of station manager and group manager who retain specialist fire safety officer attribute, etc. And he refers to the slideshow itself at paragraph 24. The next paragraph down, 25, says this: I'm unsure exactly how this version of the presentation was requested by the officer who was planning CPD inputs for this specialist CARDA. The expected procedure would be for a request to fill a speaker slot from the organiser of the SFSO day, Group Manager Spencer Sutcliffe, to have been made to the Fire Engineering Group Management. The Tall Buildings Facades presentation of 13th July 2016, which we saw earlier, was updated by my colleague Charles Ellie Romeyer. He forwarded the revised presentation, Facades Presentation version 2, to me by email at 18:59 on the 3rd of October 2016. On the email, he describes the changes made as trimmed it down with regards to the technical content, added the Shepherd's Bush fire thing and the test carried out. I also did a general tidy up and small amendments with regards to order. 27, let's just look at that for completeness. He says this: the phrase Shepherd's Bush fire refers to the 20-pump fire at Shepherd's Court. Yeah. Now, if we look at the updated version of the presentation, which we looked at before, LFB 3032916, let's go to page 15. We looked at page 21, which was the conclusions, and we have your evidence about that. But if we go to page 15, we have the case study, 20-pump fire, Shepherd's Bush, and there's a photograph of the fire at Shepherd's Court. On page 15, at the top bullet, it's recorded that the fire started on 7th floor in two-bedroom flat with rapid spread of the fire along the facade. If we go to page 16, that sets out some post-fire questions, product recall and advice given, and then there's a red arrow. Preliminary testing was carried out and witnessed by the fire engineering group to determine the behaviour of the facade and if further actions were required. And then the presentation goes on to set out in some detail the results of two series of tests that were carried out on samples of panels taken from the scene of the fire. Now, we'll return to those tests in more detail shortly, probably on Monday now. But for the moment, I just want to take you to the photograph taken during the second series of tests, which we'll find on page 19. If we go there, we can see the text on the left-hand side, and that says this. In the second bullet point, significant sustained flaming occurring following the removal of the ignition source. Test 3 was stopped after 5 minutes 44 seconds as the testing facilities were overcome by the size of the fire. This series of tests revealed that the insulation contributed to the combustion when the metal fascia was removed. And if we go to the next slide, page 20, in the conclusions in the first bullet, it says, the tests demonstrated that once the metal fascia was removed, the insulation was contributing to the combustion process. Therefore, the facade may have contributed to the fire spread. Now, as the presentation was given on the 4th of October, before the first Bureau Veritas report came to the LFB on the 3rd of November, a month later, can we take it that the information contained here in the presentation about the testing of the panels came, or most likely came, from the LFB personnel who'd witnessed the testing?
Yes, I'd say so.
Yes. But there was no, we've seen no preliminary testing from Bureau Veritas. So are we right about that? There wasn't an earlier...
No, I think I was certainly informed the results of initial testing, but a formal report would take some time to be returned to the Brigade because there needs to be second testing to substantiate the findings, and then the report drafted by Bureau Veritas, which then becomes the document back to the Brigade with the findings of the full test regime.
Let's now look at the Bureau Veritas test itself of the 3rd of November 2016. We find that at LFB 6088. And you can see that this is the Fire Safety Department report examination of cladding panels, flat 28, Shepherd's Court, and there's an introduction. And if you go down to paragraph 2.2 on page 1, scroll down a little bit more, you can see that it says this: the first panel, incomplete, was sampled from outside the living room, flat 58 on the 12th floor. The second panel, complete, was sampled from outside the living room of the flat on the fire origin, flat 28, 7th floor. And at the top of page 2, if you go to it please, paragraph 2.5, the report describes the first panel. It says it was incomplete as the external surface had come away during the fire, exposing a blue plastic foam underneath. Paragraph 2.6, the blue plastic foam was mounted on plywood board. And at 2.9, you can read between if you like, Mr. Daly, but 2.9, a sample of the blue foam was removed for further testing, and it was confirmed to be polystyrene foam by infrared spectroscopy. Now, if you go to 2.12, a little bit lower down the screen, the front surface of the complete panel was a metal sheet approximately 1 millimetre in thickness. The metal sheet attracted a magnet and was therefore presumed to be steel. And at 12.16, but same page lower down the screen, the complete panel was subjected to 3 different flame tests involving 3 different sized ignition sources to gauge the ease with which it could be ignited, and also to obtain the basic understanding of the fire behaviour of the panel. And the results of the tests are set out at paragraph 219, towards the bottom of page 2. None of the flame tests penetrated the steel sheet. However, removal of the steel sheet revealed varying degrees of fire damage to the blue foam layer underneath. And then the report goes on to consider how these materials are likely to have behaved during the Shepherd's Court fire. If you go to page 3, paragraph 3.4, and this is the last part I'll read to you before we come to a question. It says this: the flame test showed that small ignition sources acting in a localized fashion would not significantly threaten the integrity of the panel and would be unlikely to ignite a panel. However, as a fire develops and grows further, it is possible that a wide flame front could end up acting on the steel sheet of the panel. The heat from the flames would be conducted through the steel sheet and would therefore melt away the blue foam layer underneath. This would occur in progressive fashion as the fire develops and would ultimately lead to the steel sheet not being held in place by sufficient bonded blue foam. The weight of the steel sheet would then ensure that it would become detached from the remainder of the panel, likely fall away, and expose the heat-damaged blue foam and plywood layers to the developed flame front. This situation is likely to have occurred to the panels above the flat of fire origin when the living room windows of the flat of fire origin failed during the fire at this scene. Now, would you agree that the report does not record specifically what happened in the flame test on the incomplete panels? In other words, where the panels that didn't have the front metal sheet attached and where the blue plastic foam underneath was exposed to the fire?
Yes, I think it describes the delamination, if you like, for want of a better expression, of a complete panel.
Yes. Now, after that report was received, and Mr. Chairman, I'm just thinking I'm actually going on to a second set of documents in precisely the same topic. Would it be inconvenient to you and to the witness if we stopped at that point? I'm just thinking I'm not going to finish this run of documents before 4:30.
Well, if you've got quite a few more questions to come, then
yes, I mean they're better taken at one go, and they're long.
Yes, they probably would be better taken all together. But what I think we better remember to do, because we shan't come back to this before Monday, is just to read back into it.
I think that's
you might just have to cover the old ground again to some extent. I'm sorry about that.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I'm very happy to do that. Otherwise, and we have plenty of time to do that.
Yeah. Well, all right, thank you very much. Well, Mr. Daly, as you've heard, there are more questions to come on this subject, and I think it would be better to try and take them as a single group. I think we'll all benefit from being reminded when we come back where we got to and how we got there. So we're going to stop there for today. I'm going to have to ask you, I'm afraid, to come back on Monday, but I think you were probably expecting
I was expecting
that anyway, weren't you? Yes, good. So it'll be 10 o'clock on Monday morning, and obviously there's going to be quite a long gap between finishing today and resuming on Monday. So it is very important that you remember not to talk to anyone about your evidence over the weekend.
No, I understand
All
that.
right?
Yeah, that's fine.
So thank you very much indeed. Well, in that case, as I say, we'll stop there. If you'd like to go with the usher, we look forward to seeing you on Monday morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Millett. 10 o'clock on Monday then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.